Good morning, everyone. I'm Linda Hocking, and I manage the library and archives at the Historical Society, which means I've spent a lot of time with the Benjamin Tallmadge papers over the years. And I'm going to tell you about some things that Tallmadge did after the Revolutionary War, giving you a brief overview of many of his business interests, and telling you a little bit more about what that post-war period was like for Benjamin Tallmadge. So we're also really excited today that the state historian, Walt Woodward, will be joining us a little bit later to talk about the Connecticut Western Reserve and about a new book he has out, which I'm sure you'll all like to read. And finally, Alex, who you can see on the screen here, is at the History Museum, and he's pulled out some really great artifacts from Tallmadge's various business ventures that he's going to show you and tell you a little bit about. So the first thing I'm going to do, let's see, beginning. There we go. I hope you can all see my screen. So, like a lot of men of his time, Benjamin Tallmadge's business interests were numerous and varied. They included shares in privateering vessels during the Revolutionary War, a mercantile enterprise in Litchfield, where he moved after the war, and shares in a China trading enterprise. He also speculated in land in the Western Reserve, served in the United States Congress as president of the Phoenix Bank Litchfield branch, and as postmaster of Litchfield. While we won't be spending a lot of time today on Tallmadge's Revolutionary War experience, a few things that happened prior to the end of the war set the stage for his later life. On November 29, 1782, he purchased 4.5 acres of land on Town Hill, which you now know as North Street in Litchfield, with, quote, a dwelling house, barn, and storehouse thereon standing, from Thomas Sheldon for 800 pounds. The house wasn't quite as you see it here. Tallmadge later enlarged and improved the house in 1787, and that's when the columned porches that you see were added. Witnessing the slowness with which the government reimbursed expenses and the profit available to be made from privateering ventures, Tallmadge sent investments in privateering vessels to his friend, Jeremiah Wadsworth. These vessels were commercial ships that received letters of marque from the government, which enabled them to seize an enemy's commercial vessels. A list of cargo captured from the prize ship Nancy, which was captured by the vessel Mars, and Tallmadge had invested in Mars, gives a few examples of the spoils the investors could claim. The goods on that ship, Nancy, included 2 trunks of women's calamanco shoes, 80 barrels of pork, 101 barrels of beef, 140 pieces of British sailcloth, 452 boxes of British hand soap, and 40 puncheons of rum. That's 4,027 gallons. It sounds to me like a lot of supplies for a pandemic. In 1780, Tallmadge and his business associate Samuel Webb found another way to raise money. They learned that the state planned to buy back 10-pound notes at face value. These notes had been in circulation for 3 years and had by this point been really pretty far devalued. So Tallmadge and Webb were able to purchase them at far less than their face value and turn them into the Connecticut state government and redeem them for the full amount, the full 10 pounds for each note. So this was perfectly legal, and Tallmadge did continue to trade in currency after the war. So there were a couple of things that Tallmadge was able to do with that money that set the stage for his life in Litchfield. First, he was able to invest in a store in Bethlehem operated by his brother John, which he relocated in Litchfield in 1783 when he partnered with Miles Beach. The agreement, contingent upon a peace being declared between Great Britain and America by March of 1783, formed the firm Benjamin Tallmadge and Company. Second, Tallmadge was able to invest in land. Knowing they couldn't afford to pay soldiers or offer pensions, the government offered land grants to those who served. According to the National Archives, quote, Congress authorized bounty land warrants for military service in the Revolutionary War under Acts of 1788, 1803, and 1806. Grants of land in far-flung places were of little use to the veterans. Knowing that they needed cash, Tallmadge and others were able to purchase the land for far less than its value. Many wealthy Connecticut men invested in land in the Western Reserve, also known as New Connecticut, and it's now known as Ohio. So let's see if I can stop sharing. Is Walt here? Any chance?
He is not, doesn't look like.
Okay. So this is where we were hoping Walt would join us. I told him 10:45, so we're a little bit early. So does anyone have any questions to this point while we wait for Walt to join us? So you can put them in the Q&A. Nope. Okay. Oh, and there's the birthday parade. Okay.
Do you want me to go ahead and do my bit?
I was just thinking if it would make more sense for me to. Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I am here at the History Museum, and what I did was pull a few objects related to Tallmadge's business ventures, specifically working with the China trade. So Tallmadge had invested in a ship called the Trident, and it was involved in going over to Asia and gathering some goods and products that people would want back in America, bringing them back, and then Tallmadge would sell those, including in his store. So I pulled just a few examples. One of them is actually has provenance to Tallmadge's ship, and then a few other just examples of the kinds of products he would be bringing. So what I'm going to do now, just because it's easier to show it this way, is I'm going to switch the camera view over and take a look at the first object. So you can come with me over here, and then I'll switch the camera over. So hopefully you can all see this. So this is the first object we'll look at, and it actually is an example of two kinds of products that Tallmadge would have been bringing back to America and selling to his clientele. So this is a tea caddy. So tea caddy, it's a wood box, and then when we open it up inside, you'll see how it was used to store tea. But on the outside, you can see that it's actually an example of something called lacquerware, which is one of the major goods that was being sent from China and Japan and other places in Asia to foreign markets. So lacquerware, and I'll get a little close up, is made by taking a wooden object like a box, a tea caddy, or any kind of furniture that they might make, and they apply on top of it a sap from a native tree that's called the lacquer tree. They apply it in multiple layers, and as it dries, it forms this really decorative, dark surface. So you might have seen this called trepanning, you might see it called chinoiserie, but in this instance, we're going to refer to it as lacquerware. And once it's done, you can see that they were able to paint over and add in gilt and do all these really fine decorations on the surface to make this like a highly decorative and finished piece. And this box, like I said, was one that the family history says was actually brought over by Tallmadge on the Trident. So this is an example of what he would have brought back. But I'm going to go ahead and open it, and you can see the inside, what it means to be a tea caddy. So you can see here there are actually two compartments, and I will say that these are made of lead, so they're not exactly what we make our tea, our tea caddies of today. But you can see there's two canisters in here with lids. These are obviously to hold tea leaves, two different kinds. And if I get in close enough, hopefully the camera will focus. You can see that there is really fine punched or pressed decoration that are on these lead canisters. So lead is a soft metal, so it actually is very good for taking decorations, but obviously we know it today to be highly toxic. So we probably, again, wouldn't use this material. And this is a really wonderful object that we have here in the collection. I was very happy to be able to pull it today. And now I'm going to go back to my seat and switch the camera again. Sorry for, there we go. Okay. So then the second type of object I want to look at, and this is one of the major exports from China, is something called Chinese export porcelain. So it's probably a term that most of you are familiar with. So I have a nice example here, just a little dish, and you can see, you've probably seen something like this if you've been to any antique store or museum. You've probably seen an example of this. So when we talk about porcelain, just to get a definition, porcelain is a refined clay that's fired at really, really high temperatures, and it creates a vitrified or a glass-like structure that's really fine, like you can see, incredibly reflective, and it's also translucent. So one of the tests to see if it's porcelain is if you actually take like a high-powered flashlight and you shine it through the piece. If you get a soft glow coming through, you can tell it's actually porcelain, because porcelain is translucent. So Chinese porcelain was traded in Europe or brought to Europe as early as the 14th century as like a really rare, exotic luxury good. It wasn't until the 16th century and Portuguese traders that it became something that was moved in large quantities. And you have to understand, at the same time, there were potteries all over Europe that were making things in earthenware or stoneware. So stoneware is fired a little bit less temperature. It's not as fine as porcelain, but it is a very nice material. And then earthenware is fired at really low temperatures, and it's actually porous, so it doesn't hold. It's not waterproof until you glaze it. So those are the three major types of ceramics that are being made, and porcelain is obviously the highest value. So one of, you can see with this plate, the major styles of porcelain that people were buying and trading is something called blue and white. So it's called blue and white ware. You probably, again, most of the porcelain that you've seen or the Chinese you've seen will probably have some aspect of blue and white. So this is done using, there's a pigment, a blue pigment that's put on underneath the glaze, and then it's glazed over. And most common was usually floral motifs, but there's also patterns like blue willow or willow pattern, which is sort of a border on the outside with the center scene depicting something with oriental motifs. So this is really the dominant style of export porcelain all the way through to the 17th century. And then in the 18th century, they started working with some different materials as well. So this is a little salt dish. You can see it's got that blue and white, again, different types of motifs around the outside. But if you look on the inside, you can see there's some color there. So then what they ended up doing in the 18th century is we see the rise of this, what's called polychrome enamel decoration. It allows them to do different scenes, include more detail, but also to do things like coat of arms and other types of scenes that people buying the porcelain in the Western markets would want to see on their pieces. So over time, Chinese export porcelain becomes really imitated by European potters. So if you think of, in the Netherlands, you think of Dutch tin glazed earthenware, specifically Delftware. You can think of English potters and the Staffordshire potteries in particular. They're taking the style of this type of porcelain and they're adapting it to the kinds of ceramics that they're making in their own industries. But by the 18th century, so the 1700s, the secrets of Chinese porcelain are really outside of China. So there are recipes for soft paste and other types of porcelain that are being experimented by and produced by potters in Germany, France, Italy, England, and they're all sort of trying to come up with their own porcelain recipe. And many of them, eventually find a successful model. And I was really happy to find this. This is an example, a little dish. You can see it's got that same polychrome enamel painting. It's definitely an Oriental Asian inspired scene, but this is actually an example of English porcelain. So this is made by Newhall Porcelain Works from about 1812 to 1825. So again, this is an example of a variation of porcelain called bone china that the English potters were able to create and start making their own porcelain. And what this does is it really puts the export porcelain market from China into a decline for a number of years. But what happens at the end of the 18th century? The American Revolution. So the American Revolution creates a new geographic market for export porcelain in that America enters into trade with China, and there is a demand for porcelain as well as silk, tea, and the other products that Benjamin Tallmadge would have been importing. And this is when the export porcelain comes back into vogue, and they start making things like patriotic motifs, so George Washington and blue and white on a vase and things like that. So those are just a couple examples. Again, the china we're talking about is really just an example of what Tallmadge would have been importing. I couldn't find a good example of something that was specifically imported by Tallmadge. But the tea caddy we looked at was, in theory, brought on his ship to Trinidad back to America. So that's it for me. So we'll see if, yep.
There.
Just
Thanks, Alex. Okay, so Walt is trying to get in. We're having some, there he is. Wait, Let's unmute him. Walt, I can't unmute you. There you are. Hi, thank you for joining us. Your video is still muted though.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. There's a steep learning curve for these things we're finding.
Okay.
There you are, yay. Thank you
How's
so much for
everybody?
joining us.
It is my pleasure. I've been sitting here fooling with the computer trying to figure out what to do and checking emails and blah, blah, blah. Doesn't matter. So what's
So we
going on?
Sorry, well, I was hoping you could tell a little bit about the Western Reserve, why someone like Benjamin Tallmadge would be involved there, and maybe share a little bit about your new book.
Well, happy to do all of that. I write about the Western Reserve in my new book. My new book is called Creating Connecticut. It was just out this month. Hang on. You'll get to read the title backwards. But if you hold your screen up to a mirror, it will say Creating Connecticut. Is it backwards to you?
It isn't today.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
We haven't figured out why. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't.
Okay, so it's me who's backwards today. Anyway, I write about the outmigration from Connecticut in the 18th and early 19th century because I find it resonates so powerfully with the outmigration that's going on today. There was a tremendous outflux of young people from Connecticut in the early 19th century. And people like Benjamin Tallmadge and other Connecticut leaders were actually instrumentally wound up in this outmigration. Silas Deane, who was a great Revolutionary War diplomat, said that in the 18th century that speculating in land was the great boom industry of his time. And certainly we see that in this area of northeastern Ohio that Connecticut reserved for itself when they ceded the rest of their 1662 charter lands to the United States government. They kept an area of about 120 miles in northern Ohio from the Pennsylvania border to the area of what is now Cleveland, and it was from Lake Erie 36 miles south. So this big chunk of land they reserved for Connecticut's westward expansion. It was really important. Connecticut was experiencing a land shortage, an environmental crisis. They had had so many children, each generation had 8 children, that there literally was a land shortage, and what land they had was almost infertile from generations of farming it to get the most production out of it. So people needed a place to go. And while they tried other places, Vermont and Pennsylvania and New York, the place that was the big magnet was this area in northeastern Ohio. And for those of you who may have been there or have relatives there or passed through it, you can see the imprint of Connecticut on that area in the architecture, in the land, in the people, and the culture. It became a way of transplanting both Connecticut people and Connecticut and New England's cultural influence west. Benjamin Tallmadge was in the thick of this. He bought 12,000 acres with a partner from Goshen, 12,000 acres of a part of this, this Western Reserve, tried to sell it for about 10 years, ended up selling to a reverend who moved west in the early 1800s. And he, when he settled it, named the town that he settled Tallmadge. So if you go to Ohio, there is a town named after Benjamin Tallmadge there. Elijah Wadsworth, who was part of the Culper spy ring with Tallmadge and served with him, went out to the Western Reserve, became a big man out there. He actually was the person responsible for the defense of the Western Reserve in 1812 and used tactics that he had employed as a Continental Dragoon to defend what was then Ohio in 1812. And I could go on and on and on. You tell me when to stop or just, you know, push the go button and I'll keep talking. If people have questions, I'll be happy to either answer them or make something up. I'll give you a clue as to which one I'm doing.
Okay. I'm sorry. Well, I had muted myself because there's a fire truck birthday parade going on outside my house right now for the 4-year-old next door. So
yeah, your place looks so beautiful, Linda. It's really nice.
Do you like my Tallmadge house?
I do indeed. Is that your background?
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
oh,
it is.
that's
We
too
have
bad.
one
Well, it looks great.
question. The one
Yeah.
question we have is from Bill Jones, who wants to know when the Western lands became Ohio.
Well, they became, the state of Ohio was, I don't know if the word is incorporated. State of Ohio was formed in 1803, I think. They celebrated their centennial then. It was understood that from the very beginning that this part, that the Western Reserve was going to become part of a new state. So there was never a question of their becoming officially a new Connecticut. But in fact, what many people had come to realize, and you can almost see the kinds of divisions that are eventually going to lead to the Civil War, they start to take form right in this period and right during this outmigration. Because what people in the 13 original colonies, now states, figured out pretty early is that what America was going to become was going to be influenced more by the new states that were being formed in the West than the old ones, because the old ones had settled people, settled cultures, settled ways, but it was in these brand new states that this idea of what all men are created equal was going to, it's going to be hashed out by the people who go and settle there. Connecticut and the other states of New England wanted to control that story very much. So they were very active in sending cultural forces to the West. They sent a lot of ministers. They established the Western Reserve University, which is now Case Western Reserve University, one of our, very top flight A-level American universities. It started out as a prep school that was an extension of Yale. There was a lot of this going on. So moving to Ohio, or New Connecticut, when I lived there 20 years ago, and they still call it the Connecticut Western Reserve, and they're very proud of it. And if you go to the town of Tallmadge, and you go to Tallmadge Circle, which is kind of the center of the town, and you look at the Congregational Church that was built by the early settlers, if you look at the front of that church, and then you go to the Litchfield First Congregational Church and stand in front of it, you'll think you're looking at something that was designed by the same person. There's that much of a desire to transfer culture west.
It's amazing.
Well,
so
it
while
really
I have a question, while we wait to see if any of our participants have any other questions. I'm wondering, was any thought given to the people who already lived in these areas, the native people who were calling Ohio home?
There was a tremendous amount of thought given to them. In fact, there was an almost nonstop effort through both military action and through subterfuge by the new United States to get those people to give up their lands and move west. The reason the real settlement of the Western Reserve was delayed until certainly after 1795, the Treaty of Greenville, and really till after the great westward expansion happened after 1812, was because there was so much native unrest among the indigenous people who settled in Ohio. But these outmigrants from Connecticut and New England, they had, by the early 1800s, had more than a century and a half of continuous conflict and distrust between the two peoples, the indigenous people and the Anglo-Americans. And their relationships had been, nobody trusted anybody. There was continuous conflict. Alliances were formed and broken over confusion and misconceptions all the time. And really what the settlers wanted is for the native people to get out. So it's not, from our perspective, it is not a pleasant story or a fair story in any way. For the people on the ground, they felt it was there was either going to be violence and bloodshed as a part of daily life, or they were going to force these people to move to other accommodations.
Not fun.
And on that happy note,
I had to ask you a really uplifting question, you know?
yeah.
So I don't see any other questions in our Q&A, so I'm just going to thank you for joining us and let you get back to your day, unless you want to stick around entirely.
Well,
up to you.
I actually would love to, but there is much to do today. Somehow, even in a two-dimensional world, things have gotten really busy. But thank you
Okay.
so much for asking me to participate. And there is a chapter called Leaving Connecticut, Shaping America in this new book that I think will give you a really, well, I hope to think it's an interesting background on why people left Connecticut and what it was like to go to Ohio. So thank you for having me, and have a great morning.
Thank you, Walt. You too.
I still love your house, even if it's two-dimensional.
Thank you.
Bye, you guys. Bye, Alex.
Bye.
Well, and I think Sean did put a link to that book up in the chat if people want to go ahead and take a look at it.
Yeah, I see that too. We were really lucky to get a advanced copy of it because Kathy, our director, wrote a little something for the back. But so I did get to read that chapter, and it is really great. And I have read some others, and I think you'd all definitely enjoy it. So I had a few other things I wanted to share with you. So I'm going to start sharing my screen again. And then let's see, and then we'll see if anyone else has any questions. Okay, so I wanted to move on to talking about some of Tallmadge's public service. He served as the postmaster of Litchfield from 1792 until he was elected to the United States Congress in 1801. He remained there in Congress until 1817, and he was there as a member of the Federalist Party. We have very few letters in our collection from his time in office, but we do have one that reflects the challenges he faced. He wrote to his daughter Maria in 1809, expressing the difficulties his minority political party faced in Washington, including his efforts to defeat a bill to raise a standing army. In 1814, political maneuvering in the state legislature granted a charter for a branch of Hartford's Phoenix Bank in Litchfield. The charter was for a deposit bank as well as a discount bank, and the men appointed as directors were well known throughout the state, and they included Benjamin Tallmadge, who would continue to serve as the president of the Litchfield branch of the Phoenix Bank until 1826. And then Alex has told you a little bit about this already, but the China trade was something that started a little bit earlier. In June of 1805, Oliver Wolcott, Benjamin Tallmadge, and Frederick Wolcott signed an agreement to finance 4 successive voyages to China, beginning in the spring of 1806. Shares in the venture were later purchased by local merchant Julius Deming. Oliver Wolcott procured the Trident, a nearly new vessel, to carry out the trade. The ship was cleared to depart the port of New York on April 11, 1806. And after the return of the Trident in March of 1807, Oliver Wolcott announced the availability of the newly imported items in his shop in New York. They included several varieties of tea, yellow and white nankeen, which was a type of cloth manufactured in China, silks and pearl-handled combs. China and lacquerware were later added to that list. Goods that they imported were also sold in Litchfield, as well as by Belden, DeWitt and Company of New Haven. The Embargo Act of 1807, which remained in effect until 1809, raised concerns about foreign trade, which pervaded the endeavor. To allay his brother's fear, Oliver Wolcott wrote to Frederick in January of 1808, quote, "It is natural for you to feel concern respecting our China trade. I can assure you that the danger is less than appears at your distance. No merchants have failed who were not insolvent before the embargo. Large sums are due our concern, but in general, they are due from the best men in the city. There is no immediate danger of war, and the ship and cargo out are not embraced by any of the decrees of either of the parties to the war. The ship and cargoes are insured against all risks, even war, in the best offices here and in Philadelphia. Tell Mr. Deming what I write and keep yourself cool, for I assure you that we are not in any new danger." Despite that, in April of 1809, Oliver Wolcott announced to his brother, "We have concluded to send out the Trident with a moderate investment and to close the existing concern with the depending voyage." After its return in 1810, newspaper advertisements announced, quote, "On Tuesday, the 12th of June at 1 o'clock will be sold at public auction at the Tontine Coffee House, the ship Trident, a first-rate merchant ship, about 4 years old, thus concluding the 5-year enterprise." So that's about all we had to share. And if anyone has any questions, we can entertain those. And if not, I hope you'll join us for one of our upcoming programs. I've just added a few here, but of course you can go to our website to get a complete list of what those programs are. Do you have any questions? Nope. Okay. Great, thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great day.